Okay, welcome to video number 12 of the Diaries of a Coronavirologist YouTube channel. Today is the 9th of April, and we are up to about just under 1.6 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 and a little bit over 95,000 confirmed deaths. So tonight's topic is going to be talking about pets, cats and dogs for the most part. So quite early on in this outbreak, a friend of mine who actually designed the banner for the channel asked me if his cat Moleman was at any risk. And I said, probably not. Viruses are fairly species specific. They can jump species, but probably this virus is a human virus. There are coronaviruses that infect cats, but I'm going to guess this one's probably just a human virus. Anyway, it looks like I might have got that one wrong, as new data has come out recently suggesting that indeed the SARS2 virus can infect cats. So I want to talk about that a little bit tonight and break down the research that was done. So just as a little warning before I get into it in any detail, I do want to talk about the research, and the research obviously involved cats and dogs and euthanizing them and studying where virus was replicating. So if this is going to make anyone uncomfortable, please feel free to skip the video or skip past using the timestamps down in the description to when I talk about things more generally. But I do want to talk about the science that was done to explain how the conclusions were drawn. So the main study I'll talk about is one that was published on bioRxiv on the 31st of March and then published in the peer-reviewed journal Science yesterday. In this work, they looked to see whether SARS2 could infect various different animals. I'm going to mostly talk about cats and dogs, but they also looked at ferrets and pigs and ducks and chickens. I think that's a list of them. And they looked to see whether it could infect and also looked to see whether it could transmit. So they took cats that were about between 6 and 9 months old, and they directly inoculated virus into the nose. So they probably sedated the animals and then dropped virus right into the nose at a very high dose. So this is quite an artificial way to infect an animal. It's how we do it with mice in the lab here, for example, with other viruses and SARS2 when we get that system up and running. But it's not necessarily a true way that a cat could become infected in real life, and I'll talk about that more at the end. But those animals that they infected did show signs that they were infected. So they euthanized 2 of the cats after 3 days of infection, and they found that there was viral RNA in the, sorry, I need to look at my notes just so I get it all right, in nasal washes, soft palate, tonsils, trachea, lung, and small intestine. They then had 2 other cats that they let go for 6 days, and again found viral RNA in the nasal washes, soft palate, and tonsils, in the trachea of one and in the small intestine of the other. So by 6 days, there was no detection of viral RNA in the cat lungs, which is kind of interesting because it suggests that they might have cleared the viral RNA from there. And I'm talking specifically about viral RNA here. My last video, I was talking about detecting viral RNA, so I thought I'd stress this point. But they also found infectious virus particles. So just finding RNA doesn't necessarily mean there is infectious virus. But they did find virus particles in the nasal washes, so replicating in the nose, the soft palate and the tonsils and the trachea, but not in the small intestine. So it looks like the virus is replicating in the upper airways, similarly to what's seen in humans, but seemingly not so much down in the lungs, which is where the more severe disease is caused in humans. Now, in this study with the cats, they also looked to see if there was transmission possible between cats. So for for 3 of the cats they infected, they housed them with cats that they didn't infect. And it's not particularly clear how they did this. The materials aren't very well explained, or the methods aren't very well explained. But probably they just had them in 2 separate cages that have airflow between them, but the cats can't directly interact. That would be my assumption. To look to see whether the virus can transmit in an aerosol fashion, as it does in humans. And they found that in one of the 3 cats that was co-housed with an infected animal, there was evidence of infection. This time they only looked at viral RNA, so they didn't look to see if any infectious virus was being shed from that transmitted to animal, But they found after 11 days, so they euthanized the transmission model cat after 11 days and found RNA in nasal washes, soft palate, tonsils, and trachea. Again, this upper respiratory tract area. So it looked like potentially there can be transmission in a respiratory form between cats, and I'll get back to that in a moment. So what this work suggests is that if you artificially infect cats in a lab, you can get virus replication. And it suggests that potentially there can be respiratory transmission between cats. It would have been interesting and nice to see that if they'd looked more into the transmission and housed one infected cat isolated in the way I think they've done it to multiple cats, not just one to one, to see how many really transmitted to. For instance, that way you could get a sense of how transmissible the virus is and get a sense of the R0 in cats to see if it's really going to be something that spreads in these pets. So in this study, they also looked at dogs, and specifically beagles, if anyone's interested what species of animal, and they couldn't get any virus recovered. So they looked in various organs after euthanizing the dogs and took various samples from them, and they didn't detect any infectious virus particles. So it doesn't look like it can infect dogs, which is kind of interesting between cats and dogs difference. And as I said at the top, they also looked at pigs, ducks, and chickens, and they didn't find any replication of virus in those animals, but they did in ferrets. And that's kind of potentially useful because ferrets are a fairly good model for studying transmission of influenza. Sorry, I should say they're a very good model for studying transmission of influenza because their lungs are quite similar to human lungs. So the fact that this virus can replicate in ferrets is potentially useful for lab studies. So far, there is no evidence of virus transmitting from a cat back to a human. While it looked like maybe in this lab study from China, there could be respiratory transmission between cats in a very close proximity, we have no idea if a cat can transmit to a human. And we also have no idea about the severity of this infection in cats. So I don't intend to offer any recommendations because I have no idea what I'd recommend. I've seen that the British Veterinary Association, or whatever their full name is, and the American one have said a few things. So if you're concerned, I'd recommend looking that up and seeing how you approach this. But right now, it's all a little bit unclear. I'm just trying to convey the science to you that's been published this week. The other thing that's been raised is whether the virus can survive on an animal and that on the fur or the body of an animal and then transmit to a human. And right now, we don't have any evidence for that either. I am going to do a video, possibly my next one, about how the virus spreads in the air, the respiratory droplet thing versus aerosols, and how long it survives on surfaces. In the study I'm going to talk about there was nothing done regarding cats or dogs, so I can't really answer anything on that because there's just no data. So the other study that I had a little look at when researching this topic was another one from China, which took samples from 102 cats and looked for antibodies. So again, going back to my topic 2 days ago about testing, they did essentially serology testing on the cats, and they found about 15% of these cats tested positive. A lot of these were just stray wild cats, but 3 of them were from houses with people who had tested positive for COVID-19. The other story that's made the news, and people probably have seen, and that's why I got asked about this by a few friends, is a tiger got infected at the Bronx Zoo over the weekend and tested positive for COVID-19. So chances are that tiger and some of the other big cats that seem to also have similar symptoms but haven't been tested got infected from a zookeeper. That's the thought. So all in all, it does look like SARS2 can transmit from humans into cats, but not dogs. So one final thing to touch on from all this is the fact that humans with SARS2 and COVID-19 seem capable of infecting cats and potentially other animals. This could lead to something that's being referred to as spillback. I'd never come across this until recently. So we talk about when a virus comes from an animal into the human population as a spillover event. And so a spillback event is when it goes from a human back into an animal population. So developing this knowledge is going to be very important for us bringing this virus under control in future, because if it can establish animal reservoirs, there's always a chance it could then come back into the human population at a later date. So it's something that needs to be monitored and assessed and the source of future research. Anyway, that's my topic tonight on infection of animals, and specifically animals that are kept as pets, cats and dogs for the most part. It's quite interesting to see that cats particularly are capable of being infected and seemingly transmit it, and there is growing evidence that there can be infections from humans. But more study is needed. Again, like I say, that study in the lab is very artificial, and we don't really know about what level of disease the cats might develop and whether they can spread it back to humans and all these kind of things that I've touched on. But I wanted to share some of the science with you, and particularly because I've been asked by a few different friends about whether pets can be infected. So thank you for watching, as always. I appreciate people watching these videos and giving them thumbs up at the end and subscribing and sharing. Very much appreciated. And as always, please stay safe, wash your hands even. Finally stumbled over it. And keep calm and carry on. We'll get through this together. Thanks for watching.